Well, we've talked about the idea of a web page as being an HTML file that's on the internet and uses a particular format for exchanging information from computer to computer. Now let's talk about the actual structure of an HTML page. So there should be nothing particularly unusual to you about this idea that you start with an HTML tag and you put a head tag in it and you put a body tag in it, etc. Hopefully you've done that before and you haven't thought much about it. But once again, what I'd like to do with you is look at it in a different way. And the particular way that I'd like to look at it is, what are these tags, why are they called what they're called, and how do they work? How do they constitute a web page? And all of the things that we talk about here under a heading of HTML are going to become, once again, very useful to us when we talk about XML. The concepts, because XML and HTML come from a common parent, HTML, all the concepts that we know about and use in HTML are useful to us, again, in an XML context. So it's worth it for us to look at the idea of a page structure and decode it and start to build a vocabulary around how we talk about it. So we're going to start with something called the root tag. The root tag is the very first tag, the top level tag, the tag inside which all other tags are. That's the root tag. We'll also call it later on the document element, but let's stick with the terminology of root tag here. And you know what the root tag is inside of an HTML file. It's called HTML. So that tells us something very interesting. The root tag is the tag that should describe the entire rest of what's in there. It's the most descriptive element. It's the top level element. You might also think of it as kind of the title of the file. It's announcing in this case that it's an HTML file. Now that's not a very creative, not a very creative name for the tag, just to call it HTML. I might have considered calling it the document tag. So it might say document because this is an entire document. Or we might call it the page tag. This constitutes an entire page. That would have been a little bit more descriptive, but they called it HTML. It's the root tag. It has all the other tags inside of it, and it defines, it puts context around, it's the parent of all the other information in the tag. Okay, so of all the other information in the file. So at the very top, at the root element, we have HTML describing the entire rest of whatever is in that file. Inside it, there are two major divisions. One's called head, the other one's called body. Inside the HTML tag, there is a head and a body. The way to really say that is the HTML tag has a head and has a body. Its children are what it has. They constitute the HTML file, a head and a body. So those are the two major divisions. Right away inside of an HTML file, we've created two separate parts, two separate major divisions, the head division and the body division. The body division is a little bit easier to describe because it contains all of the visible elements inside the HTML file. The head element is going to take a little bit longer to unpack because there's a variety of things that head element does. The body element is actually simpler conceptually because it contains the content, it contains the body. And in this case, I really do agree with the naming of it. It's the body, it's the content, it's the visible part of the page. It's the payload. And in a way, well, let's just skip that and think about it as the body. Very descriptive term for what goes in there. It's all the P's and UL's and LI's and all the information that constitutes what the page delivers. What goes in the area inside the browser that's your domain that you get to choose the layout of. You don't get to choose the layout of the entire browser, just one part of the browser, and that's where the body tag is. Okay, so now let's go up to the head tag and describe a number of the things that the head tag does. So under the head tag, there are various children, and the only ones that we're really going to be concerned with are the title tag, the meta tag, and the link tag. Let's start with the title tag because that's really straightforward. It's the title of the page or the title of the HTML file. And in that sense, you can think of it as a little piece of metadata. It's not what's displayed. That title tag that you put in the head file is not really displayed inside the client area of the browser. It is displayed on the title bar of the browser, and you probably know that already. Whatever you type into the title tag inside the head tag, inside the HTML tag, now we're at a third level of children or a grandchild of the HTML tag. Whatever you type in there shows up in the title bar. But really, more importantly, it's a piece of metadata that describes the file as a whole. And that's why it goes in the head area. The head area, as opposed to the body area, is all, let's call it a preces or a prelude or a preview or a section that is about the file. So in a way, I almost would prefer the name metadata or meta for that head tag. We'll see the meta tag in a moment and see how it's kind of filling a little bit of a gap, but that's really what the head is about. It's about specifying things that apply to the entire HTML file. So oftentimes in computer terminology, we call that the header. That's the header of the file. It contains in metadata and all the information about the file. So that's the derivation of the name head. What I want you to know about it is that it contains all the information about the file, and that it's a major division of a file, and that it's separated from the body. Okay, so these are ways of looking at an HTML file in a sort of a more abstract or a more conceptual way that will really help you understand the general ideas of markup and especially of how we're going to do XML later. Okay, inside the head tag, as we say, is the title tag. The title tag functionally goes into the title bar of the browser window, but really more conceptually, it's establishing a piece of metadata about the entire file. This file is called, and notice we don't use the file name, we use a string, a title. It's a human readable, human understandable title. And one would wish that more was made of that title than just simply putting it in the title bar, right? Sometimes, well, actually when we do results, we show the title of the page as a major element of a result when you do a search or something like that, but not a whole lot more is made of it. And we'll see as we get into the meta tag that even less is made of that. Okay, so there's the meta tag. And then there's the idea of linking other files to this one. So the link tag does just that. It says this other file is of concern. This other file is one that is to be used in conjunction with the file that I'm in right now, this HTML file. And there are a variety of uses for that link tag. The only one that we're really going to focus on is to link a CSS file. I have a CSS file in some subdirectory. I have this HTML page. How do I say that this is the CSS file for this HTML page? I say that in this link tag. And so that's the major use that we'll make of a link tag, and that's the one that I want you to really know about. Then there's the meta tag, and I mentioned the meta tag because this is a class on information structure, and this is about as good as it gets inside of HTML for literally specifying meta tag. The inventors of HTML kind of punted on metadata. They had this idea of the title, but for example, there's no author tag that goes inside the head. You may know a little bit about Dublin Core. We'll talk a little bit about Dublin Core later in the course, but Dublin Core is an attempt to establish what should be the standard metadata about any file, any asset that you might want to have on the web. Certainly title is a standard thing that we should all talk about. Some notion of the authorship, some notion of a date, when was this created, right? Those are all other possibilities for tags that we might have seen in the head of an HTML file, specifying a comprehensive set of metadata about this file. But instead we sort of have a punt here, and we have a tag called meta, and the meta has a type, and the meta has a name, and the name specifies the kind of metadata that we want. So on the one hand, it's a punt because we don't have an author tag, for example. We don't have a keywords tag. Those are all things that we might like to say are standard metadata elements of an HTML file. Instead, we have a text field here. So this is an interesting thing that you should begin to think about. Instead of naming the tag keywords, we have a generalized tag that's just called meta, and we use the name attribute to say, this is the kind of meta that I'm talking about. We want to make it more open. We want to say that, well, you can have any kind of meta that you want. And so instead of defining a tag, an actual tag name for it, instead we put it inside the name attribute, and so you can define any one that you want. Well, the reverse of that is, because you can define any one that you want, there really are few standards, and it's up to you to then make use of anything that you define, instead of the format of the file itself giving us some standards. So, however, inside the naming of meta tags, keyword is probably the most well used, and that's why I'm going to cover it here. So the meta tag is a general tag for having whatever kind of metadata you can invent. Keywords are a standard name that you can use, and keywords, as you well know, are words that are to be used to stand in for this file. They're descriptors. They're the aboutness of the file. And so here's the format. We have meta tag. It has a name attribute and it has a content attribute. In this case, the name is keywords, and the content is these 3 phrases that describe what's in this file. We could also have a meta with name equals author, because we want to describe the author, or meta with name equals create date, or meta with things that we just decide on our own that we care about, like a meta tag with the name of the department that originated this file, right? Anything that we want. Because we have an openness and we can type whatever we want in the name attribute, we can make whatever use we want of that meta tag. But the converse, as I say, is that because you can make any use that you want of it, there's no real standards. Google doesn't pick up on the department meta tag. Google doesn't really even pick up on the keywords meta tag, which is kind of a shame. And people often leave these out, right? These meta tags are completely optional, don't have to have them. In fact, you don't have to have the title either in an HTML file, and it's kind of a problem with HTML files. You don't really have to have anything. In fact, strangely enough, you don't have to have any of these page tags, and as far as the browser is concerned, it's still an HTML page. I'll make the best of it, I'll try to figure out what to do, and I'll still display stuff. But that's not the attitude that we're going to take. We're really going to eschew that attitude entirely and instead say, we make up rules for a good reason because we want to have highly structured information that we can then depend on. If you can't depend on the structure of the information, then you can't work with it. Okay, wrapping this up. We have an HTML file that has a standard structure, and even though it's often disregarded and completely disobeyed, for us, we're going to consider it the standard structure. It has a root tag called HTML. That root tag has 2 major parts, the head and the body. Inside the body goes all of the displayable content. Inside the head goes all of the metadata. Metadata comes in various forms. It comes in a standard tag name form, and that's the head, and that's the title tag. It comes in a form of tell me all the files that are to be linked with this file. That comes in the link tag, and it comes in a sort of a cornucopia tag, general tag, whatever other metadata you care about, and that's the meta tag.